The Clank invasion had been going relatively smoothly. Everything had been going within the realm of acceptable losses, losing only 12% of their main ships, along with only losing about 40% of their ordnance on the way through. This is what they lost taking the perimeter fleet along with the defense satellites down, and now the planet was open. This planet was not a main world, it was simply a colony world. Yet, there was one factor that the Clank worried about. Humans had been seen in the area, and they're very unpredictable. The Clank, a very logical way of thinking, will sometimes get them in trouble if they're hit with anything too obtuse. So, as they began to get ready for their drop onto the planet, the XO turned straight to the commander and stated, "Yes, sir, we have made sure that we are able to land without any molestation."
You better be sure about this. I understand there are humans and they can be unpredictable. They do not go into your calculations.
"Sir, we have verified that their stationary defenses will not be able to reach to the area we are bringing down our ships. I can assure this."
You're going to be staking our lives on it, so you better be damn well sure.
"Yes, sir. As you can see on the map, all the stationary defenses are at their absolute limit once they reach this line here," pointing to an area on the holomap.
I will trust your judgment, XO, but be warned. If we lose more than the limited percentage that we can on this invasion, it's going to be your head that they're going to want, not mine.
"Understood, sir. But when this succeeds, I will be insisting on my own ship, and most likely a promotion to be higher than you." With that, he grinned at the commander, and the commander grinned back. This was just some simple banter that they had to try and lighten the mood a little bit, even though they were double checking battle plans. As the ships maneuvered into position, getting ready for the drop, they waited until everyone was there, and it would be about 21 hours before all ships were lined up until the invasion. And when it started with a bang. Initially, it was a drop of ordnance to try and clear out any and all of the stationary defenses that may be in the area, stressing may as they were not sure. Following behind that was all sorts of aerospace fighters that would go in and bombard the area, as well as having some sort of aerial cover. Inside the atmosphere, inner atmosphere fighters reigned supreme, and aerospace fighters needed to be loaded down heavily with ordnance to be able to fight them off. They just did not have the maneuverability. If anything was launched at them and their countermeasures did not work, the pilot had one choice, and that was to eject. And if he didn't eject in time, well, just like the captain, he goes down with the ship. As the fighters began to make their way across, they began to look farther and farther out, opening the corridor as many of the dropships began to lower themselves. Nothing larger than their frigates could actually land on the planet and still have a chance of lifting off, so they had to make sure that they landed with only light ships. These light ships would have to shuttle some of the heavier equipment down, but once they had a foothold on there, they knew, humans or not, they would be able to take the planet by simply running them over with numbers. As the fighters came down, they received no resistance, and they were surprised at this. They were surprised that nothing showed up. No inter-atmosphere fighters were coming down. By the time they got inside the atmosphere, their aircraft, their aerospace fighters, were simply barely able to keep up as they were flying through a very thin atmosphere with minimal lift and a heavy load meant that they had very, very limited maneuverability. As they looked over, some of them marked how there was some sort of farm machinery moving around. As this planet was in the middle of being terraformed, this was to be expected. They were actually surprised to see so much movement on the ground, but they didn't expect anything too much. They expected those that were moving in simply to be retrieving their own personnel. Many of the attacking forces would laugh at this, knowing that these personnel would be made slaves soon enough, or they would simply be made to fertilize the ground. As the frigates and corvettes started to make their way through, they started hearing alarms going off, but no one knew where the detection was coming from. It seemed like it was coming from all different directions at the same time. Yet all of a sudden, one of the pilots screamed, "Incoming! Incoming! Incoming!" No one knew what was going to happen, and suddenly the alarm started going absolutely crazy, letting them know that there was incoming ordnance. From where from, all of a sudden they saw on their radar that there was a wall of ordnance coming up. It seemed as all the farm equipment wasn't farm equipment. These strange vehicles that seemed to simply glide across the ground, even though they had no lift technology, with nary a simple incumbence to their movements, was strange to the Clank. As they looked over, it seemed as though somehow they had lifted up part of their own body and just shot ordnance towards all the corvettes and frigates. Many of the fighters tried to turn and use their intercept rockets to actually catch the ordnance, but it was flying too fast, too straight, too deadly. Much of the countermeasures were sent, but nothing was taken. Nothing was moved. It seemed like this ordnance was on a death spiral straight towards the ships. The ships, already caught in the gravity well, had one choice, and that was to land even faster. But they wouldn't have a choice, as within moments the bottom of their vessels began to get pelted with all this ordnance, some of it sinking deep inside the ship before exploding. Many of the corvettes simply split into many pieces and tumbled to the ground in fireballs. The fighters banked as hard as they could, trying desperately to keep enough lift in this light atmosphere to be able to face off against whatever the hell just shot up all their corvettes, and half of their frigates were now on fire as they were still heading towards the ground, most of them still barely able to stay from crashing in. The anti-gravity motors strained inside the ship. On board the capital ship, the captain screamed, "What the hell is going on?" "Sir, I don't know. I don't know. This is we have no reports of this. This is beyond anything. This is such an obtruse way of Oh shit. It's the humans, isn't it? It's the only option, sir. It's the only possibility. But if we can get our people on the ground." And then they heard another round of alarms. "There's more?" They looked, and there was another wave of ordnance coming up, this time striking not only the bottom of the frigates, but taking out many of the aerospace fighters as well as they began to move into position. This made the rest of them shudder as several of their frigates began to tumble through the atmosphere, losing one side of their anti-grav motors, which meant they were going to spin out of control and crash onto the planet. The only chance that the crew had was to bail out, but spinning like that is a quick way to get crushed up onto the side and being unable to get out in time before you end up simply a scorch mark on the surface of the planet. They looked over, and as the aerospace fighters began to get close, another amount of signals came in, a large amount. These were the in-atmosphere fighters, but just as they got within radar range, they began to launch their own ordnance. This surprised the living hell out of the aerospace fighters, as they didn't think anyone could fire from that distance. They knew they had to get closer to try and line up their own. What the hell was going on? They immediately tried to duck down into the atmosphere, trying to make the rockets and missiles waste their propellant as they were screaming towards them. Yet in the light atmosphere, it didn't seem to matter. The missiles themselves locked on to the aerospace fighter. A few of the more experienced pilots knew to jettison everything they had, immediately turn away from the incoming ordnance, and slam the throttle as hard as possible. Maybe, just maybe, they can get enough distance that the missiles incoming would run out of their propellant. The rest didn't have a chance. If they didn't immediately jettison all their ordnance, they couldn't maneuver. There was no way of dodging it, and many of them turned into fireballs, burning up into nothing in the sky as their planes fell to the ground. And with that, another wave of ordnance came up from the ground, this time striking the bottom of the last of the frigates. Many of the destroyers that had moved into position tried to fire down towards where these missiles were coming from, but they ended up striking nothing. Why? They couldn't figure out why until they were able to finally get visual cues on where these missiles were coming from. They looked up and they saw that these systems that seemed to move across like farm equipment on strange tracks on the bottom would simply move to a different position, raise the back, and then fire up. It seemed as though they were getting commands from somewhere, but where? One of them must be giving commands. Maybe if they could take out the leader, they could slow them down. Maybe, just maybe, but they wouldn't have a chance. The last of the frigates was struck again, this time directly into the rear-facing engines, and with that, the engines exploded, tearing 2/3 of the frigate to pieces, launching the front third forward, and then turned into its own burial pyre. With that, the invasion was over. They had no more ships to get anyone on the ground. They thought for a moment maybe they could simply burn the planet, turn it into glass, but then again, that would go against what they wanted. They wanted the planet, they wanted the people on it. Why would they destroy what they wanted so bad? They simply had to turn away. The captain was not happy about this as he ordered the battle group to withdraw from the space. Damn humans, he thought to himself. The XO began to look for any reason, any way that he could save face. But as he mumbled his words, the captain simply turned, raised a tentacle, and slapped him. This was a disgraceful move, and everyone on the bridge saw it. Being slapped like that was tantamount to being just spit on by human standards. As they left, a transmission came in from the surface. A very broken transmission, and they could barely see who was in it. As they looked, the human face was there with some strange covering on his head. It looks like whoever this was inside some sort of vehicle or vessel, as there was very little room. They could hear the rumble of some sort of motor in the background, as it seemed as though they were moving, as the image kept moving up and down. The captain realized what this was and said, "What do you want, human?" And with that, the human simply responded, "Simple. Don't come back ever." "You do not give the Empire orders." "No, but I give you one. Stay away, or next time we'll make sure none of you leave." And with that, the transmission immediately cut. The captain was clearly rattled. How could one small group of humans, barely 5,000, stop an entire invasion force of over 270,000? This boggled the mind. It shook them to their core. Their logical thinking could not figure this out. How could humans figure out how to fight so well on distant planets out in the middle of nowhere? This question would rattle them all the way to their own embassies, where they finally met with the humans and asked them how they came up with weapons on the fly like that. The human ambassador looked confused and said, "On the fly? The hell are you talking about? The equipment you faced over there on Fairlax 2? Yes, that is the one." "Oh, that's just old equipment we gave the local militia. I mean, that stuff's extremely outdated." The Clank ambassador suddenly got very nervous. Then the human simply turned and said, "You really want to find out what we use now?"